In the year 1871, in a small English town shrouded in mist and suspicion, a woman passed away leaving behind a will that would perplex generations. Her name was Mrs. Crawshaw, a widow with no surviving children and very few who claimed to know her well. She lived quietly, in a modest home that faced the churchyard, rarely seen beyond her garden gate except for Sundays when she took her place in the back pew. Yet, when the executors opened her will, what they discovered stunned them. She left behind £300 in silver, neatly recorded, and 9 full sets of fine china. It wasn't the fortune itself that unsettled the town. It was how little sense it made. Mrs. Crawshaw's house was simple, her clothes plain, her lifestyle austere. She never gave the impression of wealth, and more troubling still, no one could determine where she had acquired such a hoard of silver. Her neighbors whispered of smuggling, or inheritance, or debts owed to her late husband. But when pressed, none could recall her ever mentioning family, fortune, or friends. If you're new here, welcome to Silent Heirs. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the mysteries that lie buried in forgotten wills, unsolved crimes, and the shadows between history and folklore. The story of Mrs. Crawshaw begins with her final illness, when the village doctor, a man of strict rational habits, noted something peculiar. Though frail and fading, she asked again and again about her silver, whether it was still safe, whether it had been disturbed. Not once did she inquire about her soul, her salvation, or even her burial. It was the silver, always the silver. She refused to let the servants touch the chest in her upstairs room, claiming that it must remain sealed until her death. When the doctor tried to reassure her, she gripped his wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "It must not be moved, not yet. They are not done with it." At first, he thought it was delirium, but the servants later confirmed that in the silent hours of night, they sometimes heard her speaking as if to unseen visitors, her voice calm but commanding. One girl reported a faint chiming sound, like coins striking against porcelain, though no one had gone into the room. Another claimed she saw a shadow move across the landing when all lamps were extinguished. Such tales would have been dismissed as gossip, yet when her will was revealed, they took on a darker weight. £300 in silver was not a fortune of unimaginable size, but in those days it was enough to buy land, livestock, or to keep a family fed for years. 9 china sets, each complete, each in excellent condition, was stranger still. They were not the mismatched collections of a thrifty housewife, but deliberate purchases or gifts. Blue and white willow patterns, delicate floral motifs, gilded rims. Too many for one woman to use, yet too pristine to suggest heavy use at all. Who had she expected to host? For whom had she set aside 9 entire sets? The local solicitor, tasked with executing the will, recorded an observation in his journal. He wrote that the silver, though genuine, seemed oddly cold to the touch. Not cold like metal left in a draft, but a deeper chill, one that seemed to linger even after contact ended. He noted his fingers felt stiff after counting it, as if he had been clutching ice. He laughed it off at first, but mentioned the detail to his wife, who grew pale and asked him not to bring the coins home again. Others, less skeptical, began to weave tales. They said Mrs. Crawshaw had not acquired her silver honestly, that she had dealings with men who never gave their names, who arrived at her back door long after midnight, carrying heavy sacks. One innkeeper swore that she sometimes walked alone on the cliffs, staring out at the Black Sea as though waiting for a lantern signal. Smugglers, perhaps, but the mystery deepened when records were searched. No missing cargo, no inheritance listed, no sudden windfall that could explain her fortune. When the chest was finally opened, a curious sight awaited. The silver coins bore years that stretched back decades, some tarnished nearly black, others shining as though newly minted. Mixed together with English currency were foreign pieces, French, Spanish, even a few from distant ports. How could a solitary widow in a sleepy English village have assembled such a collection? And why, above all, had she preserved it untouched? The china was no less strange. Each set was complete, yet no two were alike. It was as if someone had delivered them piecemeal, or as if she had gone out of her way to ensure they were collected over years. No one remembered her shopping in nearby towns. No guest recalled dining with her on anything finer than a plain plate. Yet hidden away, 9 glittering sets waited, unused, as if prepared for a gathering that never came. Rumors turned darker when the servants were interviewed. One insisted she had heard Mrs. Crawshaw speak to the china, as though addressing unseen companions. She would pause between words, as if listening for a reply. Another said she once caught the old woman cradling a teacup, murmuring to it in a voice low and rhythmic like prayer. The servant swore she saw her breath clouding the air though the fire roared in the hearth. After her death, the executors divided the inheritance as instructed. The silver was weighed, recorded, and distributed. The china was catalogued and sent to various relatives no one had ever seen before. But here the story refuses to settle. For soon after, strange reports began to surface. A nephew in London claimed the silver he received seemed to multiply. Coins he was sure he had spent returned to the pouch. Another, less fortunate, said his share dwindled inexplicably, no matter how carefully he counted. And the china? In more than one household, cups cracked without cause, plates shifted on shelves at night, and once, an entire set toppled to the floor though no one was near. In time, Mrs. Crawshaw's name became one spoken with unease. Was she a smuggler, a hoarder, a witch, or merely a lonely widow clinging to possessions that had become her only company? The records do not say. They preserve only the will, the silver, and the 9 china sets, each carrying whispers of an inheritance that did not rest easily in the hands of the living. But perhaps the most chilling account comes not from her neighbors or heirs, but from the church sexton. He claimed that on the night after her burial, as the fog rolled in, he passed by her cottage one last time, and in the darkened window, he saw the faint gleam of candlelight, illuminating the silhouette of a woman seated at a table. Before her, set in perfect order, were plates and cups, 9 places in all. He looked again, and the window was empty. The silver did not rest. In the weeks following its distribution, the executors found themselves summoned again and again to address quarrels among the heirs. Each claimed the others had tampered with their portion, for the weight of the coins shifted mysteriously. One man accused his cousin of switching his good silver for foreign pieces. Another swore his chest was heavier than before, though he had not added a single coin. In one particularly grim dispute, 2 brothers fell to blows after their sister insisted that her share had begun to blacken and crumble, as if rotting from within. The solicitor, unnerved by the growing tension, returned to his journal. He described in careful language how he had locked away several of the disputed coins for examination. Days later, when he returned to the drawer, he found the silver had rearranged itself into neat stacks, though he alone held the key. He did not write again for some months. When he finally did, his hand was unsteady, and the ink blotched the page. He confessed he had begun to dream of Mrs. Crawshaw's parlor, though he had never stepped foot in it while she lived. In these dreams, he would see the chest opened, the coins spilling across the floor like mercury, flowing into the shape of a seated figure, always silent, always waiting. Meanwhile, the china sets began to leave their quiet destruction. In London, the nephew who had received the willow pattern set awoke one morning to find all 9 teacups arranged on his mantel, though he had locked them in a sideboard the evening before. His servants denied moving them, but one later confessed that during the night she had heard a faint clinking, as though porcelain were knocking against porcelain, moving steadily through the house. Another heir, a widow in Bath, was gifted the floral gilt-edged set. She wrote to the solicitor in growing distress, claiming that whenever she attempted to pour tea, the liquid seemed to darken in the cup, reflecting not her own face, but that of an older woman with sunken eyes. Her guests refused to drink, saying the taste was bitter, metallic, as though steeped with blood. When she finally smashed the set in her garden, her neighbors claimed they heard the sound not once, but 9 times over, echoing as if from beneath the earth. By now, the town had begun to call the inheritance cursed. Villagers whispered that Mrs. Crawshaw had not simply hoarded her silver, but bound it to something far older. Some spoke of the smugglers again, of debts unpaid, of silver taken from drowned sailors and never sanctified. Others hinted at darker pacts, rituals whispered in the dead of night, with china sets laid out not for dining, but for invocation. The doctor, who had attended her in her final days, found himself unable to dismiss these rumors entirely. He admitted privately that when he sat with her during her last hours, he had felt the weight of many eyes upon him, though they were alone in the room. He described the sensation of standing in a crowded gathering, with silence heavy and expectant, as though the guests were holding their breath. When he looked at her bedside table, he thought he saw, just for an instant, a cup and saucer resting there. But when he blinked, it was gone. Years passed, and yet the accounts did not fade. The coins were traced into other hands, sold, exchanged, gambled away. In each case, the silver carried with it a peculiar unease. A farmer who tried to bury his share found the soil frost-hardened though it was midsummer, his spade clanging against unseen resistance until he abandoned the task. A merchant who displayed the coins in his shop awoke to find them arranged into circles on the counter, though the shutters had been fastened tight. As for the china, fewer sets remained intact. Some were destroyed, others dispersed. Yet wherever they went, stories followed. A maid in a great house claimed she saw figures reflected in the empty plates, seated around the table though no one was present. A child refused to sleep in a room where a cabinet of Crawshaw porcelain was kept, insisting that he heard whispering when the lamps went out. In one case, a clergyman who inherited a set found his sermons disrupted by sudden crashes in the night. The parish believed rats were to blame, until they discovered that every plate in the cupboard had split cleanly down the center, as if by an unseen blade. It was then that scholars began to take interest. One antiquarian, examining the surviving sets, noted that each pattern carried subtle imperfections, symbols etched into the glaze, tiny marks not part of the manufacturer's design. He suggested they were charms, protective or otherwise, drawn into the porcelain itself. But protective against what? No answer was found, and still the will itself seemed to mock the living. For in her testament, Mrs. Crawshaw had written only this: the silver is to be kept together. The china sets are to be divided among 9 hands. They will know their purpose when the time comes. What purpose? None of the heirs could say. Yet the solicitor's final entry, discovered after his death, offers a grim suggestion. He wrote of waking one night to a noise in his study. There, he found the disputed coins once more arranged upon his desk, not in stacks, but in a ring. In the center, one teacup sat upright, though he had never brought the china into his home. The candlelight flickered, and he swore he saw the reflection of 9 figures seated in a circle around him, silent, waiting, their faces hidden in shadow. When he reached out to shatter the cup, it was empty air. But the ring of silver remained, and in it, the faintest scent of salt water and smoke. The silver that vanished without a sound was not simply wealth, it was an inheritance of dread. And for those who touched it, who dared to claim it as their own, the question remained. Had they accepted a legacy, or invited something unfinished into their lives? For though Mrs. Crawshaw's grave grew moss and her name faded from the parish rolls, her presence lingered, not in memory, nor in kindness, but in objects that refused to rest. And perhaps still, in forgotten cupboards and hidden drawers, her silver and her china wait, shifting in the dark, preparing for the gathering that never came. The final echoes of Mrs. Crawshaw's estate reached far beyond the small village where she lived and died. By the turn of the century, fragments of her silver and her china had scattered across England, and with them spread an undercurrent of unease. Newspapers rarely printed such things, yet local columns hinted at strange misfortunes. Accidents, sudden deaths, unexplained vanishings, that all seemed to follow the trail of her inheritance. One story tells of a shipping clerk in Bristol who came into possession of several Crawshaw coins through a debt repaid. Within weeks, his colleagues reported that he had grown withdrawn, his eyes fixed often on the empty air as though following unseen movement. He stopped eating, speaking, and finally working altogether. When pressed, he whispered only, They are waiting at the table. There is a place set for me. Days later, he vanished. His lodgings were searched, but all that remained on his desk was a single teacup filled to the brim with salt water. Another account comes from an old inn along the coast, where a set of Crawshaw's blue and white porcelain was put into service after the innkeeper inherited it from a distant cousin. Guests complained of unease, claiming that when they dined, the patterns on the plates seemed to ripple as though alive. One fisherman swore he saw the painted willow branches sway as if blown by wind, though the room was still. The innkeeper dismissed the tales until one night, while clearing the tables, he found all 9 plates rearranged, each bearing the impression of a hand pressed into its surface, faint but undeniable. The set was locked away, but the inn soon closed after a fire consumed the upper floors. No cause was ever found. Whispers grew of a connection between the silver and the porcelain, that together they formed not a mere inheritance, but a ritual divided into pieces. Some speculated Mrs. Crawshaw had once belonged to a circle, a gathering of occultists or seekers who believed wealth and spirit could be bound. The silver, cold and restless, was said to anchor something in the earth. The china, delicate yet enduring, was thought to summon it forth. Alone, each brought mischief. Together, they promised something far more dangerous. In the 1920s, a folklorist named Edith Halley attempted to trace the surviving sets. She published only fragments of her findings before her sudden death, but her notes, preserved in an archive, remain chilling. She interviewed descendants of the Heirs, many of whom refused to speak on record. Yet privately, they confessed that the silver never stayed long in one place. It seemed to move, to dwindle, to replenish itself, depending on how it was kept. The china, on the other hand, resisted destruction. Even when shattered, pieces turned up intact months later, as if reconstituted. Halley recorded a disturbing theory, that each set corresponded to a seat at a table not meant for the living, and that the inheritance was never meant to enrich but to prepare. Prepare for what? Her final note, scrawled in a shaky hand, gives a clue. The 9th place is still empty. Modern historians dismiss these accounts as superstition, but local memory clings to them. Villagers near Mrs. Crawshaw's old cottage, long since abandoned and half-consumed by ivy, still claim to see candlelight flickering in the windows on certain nights. They speak of the sound of porcelain chiming together, faint but rhythmic, as if dishes were being set for a meal. No one dares enter after dark, for they say the air inside is thick, difficult to breathe, and carries the metallic tang of old coins. Some believe the cottage itself is a threshold that Mrs. Crawshaw was not merely a miser but a keeper, tasked with holding objects that should never have left their resting place. Others argue she was complicit, that she embraced the company of her unseen guests, and through her will ensured their influence would spread far beyond her lifetime. Whether victim or conspirator, her legacy endures in every report of cursed silver and restless china, in every unsolved mystery tied to her name. And what of the missing pieces today? The trail has grown cold, yet rumors persist. A coin that never warms to the touch, passed between collectors. A teacup that reappears no matter how many times it is discarded. A cabinet in a private estate where plates are said to whisper when the house is silent. None can be proven, but none are easily forgotten. The story of Mrs. Crawshaw is not one of ghosts that shriek or figures that stalk the night. It is quieter, more insidious. It is the story of objects that carry with them a presence, a purpose, and perhaps a hunger. To touch them is to step into a gathering that is still underway, a banquet that has not ended, where the silver is weighed and the china is set, and where one seat, always one, remains vacant. And so, the inheritance lingers, an unsolved mystery, a paranormal encounter passed down through possessions rather than blood. A cryptid sighting of another kind, not of beast or shadow, but of a ritual that refuses to conclude. If you find yourself in an old market, and your hand strays toward a stack of antique silver coins that feel colder than they should, or a teacup whose glaze bears a pattern you cannot quite place, ask yourself, whose place are you filling? And when you set it down, listen carefully. You may hear the faintest clink, the sound of porcelain joining porcelain, a seat waiting to be filled. For Mrs. Crawshaw left 300 pounds in silver and 9 china sets. And she left something else as well. Something that has not yet finished gathering its heirs. If you found yourself drawn into the shadows of this mystery, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Silent Heirs for more unsolved mysteries, paranormal encounters, and stories that linger long after the telling. Until next time, sleep lightly and keep listening.